All of this started in the 1970s. I'm sure you remember hearing those words. Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or as we now know it, ADHD. Plenty of people still consider this to be basically an overreaction. Others point to the parents. Some say genetics. Some say that it is simply the kids are being over-medicated. Some say maybe we got to point to cell phones and the internet as well. There's a lot to discuss here. Our guest is author of a brand new book that discusses a lot of this and actually has a title that points to a lot of what the issue is about here. A disease called childhood, why ADHD became an American epidemic. Welcome Dr. Marilyn Wedge to MidPoint today. Doctor, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Ed. I'm happy to be here.
Happy to talk about this because I think this is something that needs a whole lot more attention. I'm going to talk about cell phones, internet, and a bunch more. We're going to talk a lot about the book. But when did we get to the point, to start off this conversation, of where this disease was born, where it became something real? Because quite frankly, to a lot of us who grew up in the 70s and the 80s, it just seemed to pop up overnight.
Well, I agree. When I started my practice in 1988 as a child therapist, I had never heard of ADHD. And in fact, the name was begun in 1987 with the publication of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 3rd edition, revised edition. So in 1987, we got the word ADHD, Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. But I really didn't see it in my practice very much. Nobody asked, no parent came in and asked me if their child had this. But in the early and mid-90s, things began to change. And almost every child who came to my office had been referred by their school to be evaluated for ADHD. And now we have a situation where 11% of our children in the United States are diagnosed, and 2/3 of those are taking stimulant medication.
Did this just become, and I'm not trying to downplay this, I'm sure there are some parents who will be very angry at me for even saying this out loud, but did this become almost an excuse for people when they just didn't know what was wrong? I mean, look, when I grew up as kids, we had a lot of kids who did this. We were just called a little hyper. Nobody really started to put us on meds, but all of a sudden it looked like everybody wants an excuse.
Well, I think parents in general want to do the best for their children. They have the best interests of their children at heart, and they want their children to do well at school. And schools are not really set up for hyper kids these days. Schools are very streamlined and standardized, and there's testing, and some kids just don't do well in that environment. And so they're falling behind at school, and the parent brings the child to the pediatrician, and the pediatrician says, well, yeah, he may have ADHD and medication will help him.
But are we looking to over-medicate, though, I think is what a lot of people are asking, because it still seems as if the parents may have something that they can do when a lot of parents, and again, I'm going to get hammered for this, but I'll take it, a lot of parents are just looking to see what can we give the kid to calm them down instead of doing something that doesn't include meds.
Well, exactly. And that's what my book is about. There's a lot that parents can do. You mentioned electronic screens. They can limit. It's so important to limit electronic screen time. Children, it's sensory overload to have excessive time on electronic screens. And I think parents need to be educated about the effects that screen time have on a child's brain. It can make them inattentive and hyperactive. And it makes them sleep deprived because they stay up at night texting their friends. So I think there's a lot of education to be done. And yes, my book is full of many of the many strategies that parents can use to avoid medicating their children.
I got about 45 seconds left, and we'll take a break, come back and talk some more. But in your professional opinion, do parents want to hear this, that they're the ones that need to do some work and not use medication?
I think they don't want to hear this. It's so much easier to say ADHD is like bronchitis or diabetes and your child needs medicine, and it's not the parent's fault. I think as a parent, we feel guilty if the doctor says you need to be doing things differently at home.
We need to understand that there's a difference here. We need to understand that there is medicine actually involved in here. There are kids who suffer from certain things, but we need to sort of break this down and try and figure out how to tell the difference between the two. Dr. Wedge, if you would, please stand by just a couple of moments because we're going to take a break, come back and do just that. Again, we are not trying to minimize what parents are going through who are listening to us today, but it is a fact. There are people out there who simply would say, instead of my doing something, give the kid some medication, let's make him or her better. And that's not always the way to do it. We'll focus on that part of the story and a whole lot more when we come back right here on MidPoint. Welcome back to MidPoint, and once again, let us welcome back the author of a fascinating new book that actually, if you think about it, a lot of parents need to read if they have young children, A Disease Called Childhood, Why ADHD Became an American Epidemic. Dr. Marilyn Wedge joins us once again here on MidPoint. Dr. Wedge, let's get to what we talked about, screens, phones, tablets, computers, on, the video games. I mean, honestly, when I was a kid, my mother and father used to tell me, don't sit too close to the television, it'll hurt your eyes, it'll hurt your brain. You always used to hear that as a kid, it'll make you nearsighted. But now aren't we getting to the point where the kids are so fascinated with these that has a brain effect and a psychological effect that you simply can't measure immediately? It's cumulative, is it not?
It is, and it becomes almost like a drug addiction. Some research has shown that dopamine, the chemical in the brain that is involved with cravings for drugs or alcohol, it is also involved with screen addiction. So that the more kids play these fast-paced electronic games, the more they want to. And I've had teenagers tell me that they feel like they are addicted to the screen, to their smartphone or to their computer games.
But what's a parent supposed to do here? Because let's be very frank here. There are some who are going to say, wait a minute, my child is suffering something medically. However, the other will say, well, it could just be the screens and the videos. Plus, let's add to that the kids, if you try to take away their phone or their pads, you'll have an armed rebellion on your hands. So what's a parent supposed to do in order to try and tell the difference?
Well, the first thing is parents need to be parents and not their kids' friends. There's been a loss of authority among parents. They want to be the fun parents, the kids' friends. And I think they need to look into the matter and find out the negative effects. So in my practice, many parents I've instructed about this, they shut off the internet at 9 p.m. They have their kids' cell phones confiscated at 9 p.m. It's time for bed. They want their kids to get a good night's sleep, and being on the screen, it interferes actually with good sleep. So parents really need to take the lead. They need to put parental controls on their kids' electronics, and they need to limit, just like our parents said, don't sit too close to the TV, it'll hurt your brain. They were correct. Parents need to be doing the same thing today.
Do you agree with those who seem to now create a correlation between the use of a cell phone and mental illness?
Well, and certainly I've seen it in my practice that I don't think ADHD is a mental illness. It's a set of behaviors. Mm-hmm. But yes, I think it can create behaviors that we would look at and say are mental illness, like hyperactivity or inattentiveness, or even aggressive behavior. So not mental illness overall. There are some sites, as that article points out, that are porn sites or self-harm sites. And of course, those are very dangerous for kids.
Do we need to just get to a point, Doctor, in about the minute or so that I have left, for parents to understand that you can't cure everything with a pill?
It's true. ADHD is not a biologically caused medical illness. There is no genetic or brain information that the research has proved nothing. It is not a medical illness. Parents need to take control, become active, and use techniques to help their child learn to control these behaviors.
And I would guess that probably the biggest thing that you're going to have is when you come up to somebody and say, you got to stop being your child's friend, they would go, oh, I can't do that. That would be horrible. That's got to be the worst part of having to deal with a parent sometimes.
It is, because parents don't like to say no. And parents are working. You have two working parents. When they want to come home, they want to say yes to their children. And I think, of course, we want to say yes as much as possible. But kids have to learn these days that no means no. I think parents are just too permissive because they're too tired and stressed to enforce discipline.
Tell you what, my parents said no to me a lot. I didn't like them then, but I still love them now to death because I'm glad for what they did. The book is once again called A Disease Called Childhood, Why ADHD Became an American Epidemic. Frankly, I think it should be de rigueur reading for everybody here who has kids. Dr. Marilyn Wedge, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ed.
Take care. The governor of California says that one thing above all should disqualify Ted Cruz at the White House. We'll tell you about that when we continue.